Hello, my name is Nadine and welcome to Hop Along Studio. So in today's video, I wanted to show you how you can make these very simple Christmas cards using acrylic paint, embossing powder, and some simple stamps. So let's get started. So to start with, let's talk about paper sizes. I'm using a piece of black paper that's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 for some smaller cards and a 5 by 7 piece of cardstock for some of the larger cards. And I chose white and black so I can show you how this technique works on 2 different types of paper. And so if you want something that's a little bit darker or if you want something a little bit lighter, this can work either way. So the first thing you want to do is add some acrylic paint to a surface. In this case, I'm using my jelly plate. I actually saw this in a video earlier this week where the woman basically used her jelly plate as a stamping block, and it actually worked really well for putting some paint down. Because the nice thing too is once you're done with your paint, you can actually do a print and then you have a jelly print as well, which I thought was really brilliant because then you're not really ending up wasting paint. So I'm using this Dina Wakley Media heavy body acrylic paint in gilt and in sterling as well. And so what you want to do is actually take your brayer. I have this tiny little brayer here, and I am going to just spread it out across the surface. I'm just going to start with the gold. And the gold I'm going to be doing on the white piece of paper. So the stamp set that I will be using today is this Tim Holtz Swirly Snowflakes. I really like these snowflake stamps, and they add a lot of variety to this piece. So once you've adhered your stamp to your stamping block, you want to stamp into the paint and then onto your surface. And you definitely want to make sure that you're getting a randomized pattern. And make sure you don't add too many snowflakes because you are going to be adding snowflakes of another color as well. So usually for a large piece like this, I usually do 5. And they don't have to be 5 full images, they can be 5 even partial images. And then every couple stamps, I just re-roll my brayer. And there you go. So I'm going to set this aside and let it dry completely before I move on to the next step. So now I'm going to work with my black piece of paper and my silver. And I'm not going to actually bother cleaning my brayer. I actually don't mind the idea that the two colors are mixing a little bit. I'm going to use the same stamp. And again, I'm not going to bother cleaning it. I'm just going to start stamping. And then so now you can see there's a little bit of gold and a little bit of silver, which I personally like. If you don't like it, you can always clean your surface a bit more, but I like the mixture of color. And in this case, because it is a smaller card, I'm only going to do 3 images. I usually work in odd numbers for my art projects because there's something to be said about groups 1s and 3s. An odd pairing always makes for a more interesting final image, so I really try to keep that in mind as I stamp. So now that the jelly plate, I've used my paint that I want, I'm just going to add a couple more marks on my jelly plate. Grab a piece of paper and just write it over top. And what this allows you to do is this allows you to kind of get a print out of the extra paint that you left on your jelly plate. There you go. So you have something that you can use as an image on another project. So once you've actually let these dry and the acrylic paint is dry, you actually want to add your stamp to your same stamping block, and you want to add some embossing powder. So in this case, I'm going to be using Top Boss embossing stamp today, not my distress embossing ink pad. You can really use either. I just happen to have this one and I've almost never used it, and it does a great job embossing just as well as the Ranger, so I'm just going to use it today just to mix things up. And so in this case you want to vary your spacing based off of what you've already done. So I'm going to have an image overlapping there. Again, you can't really see it. And in this case I'm only adding in 3 images. And I'm going to overlap there as well. So you can't really see it, and that's kind of the point. It's a clear embossing powder. So I've actually dropped my card in a box, and I've now I'm going to be adding distress embossing glaze on top of these images. And the reason I always emboss in a box is it prevents so much mess. The nice thing with these embossing powders is they do stay wet long enough for you to be able to get your images on. In this case, I see a couple spots where it's actually outside of the snowflake, so I'm just going to take a paintbrush and quickly clean up the edges. So now that I look at my layout, I see that I don't really like it the way it is because I've had the acrylic stamps that have been nicely evenly staggered, and there's 3 very heavy blue spaces on the right hand side. So now I'm going to actually go in and add a little bit more and heat set it so that I get a little bit more of a balanced design. So as you can see, now that I've added the 2 that are offset here, you have a little bit more balance in the design. If I was to do this again, I would actually have moved these a little bit further over and done it a little bit differently, just to try to leave a little bit more white space. But for this demonstration, I think this is good enough. So now we're going to move on to the black image. So you want to use the same sort of process. Again, adding your images and then adding embossing powder. So for the white card, I actually used a Distress Glaze embossing powder. The reason I chose that is you can see on the card itself that you can actually see through the embossing powder, and that was on purpose. That's the thing about the Distress Glaze embossing powder, is you can actually see, it's semi-translucent, so you can actually see the image underneath. And for this one, because we're working on black paper is a little bit harder, you're not going to be able to see your image through. So you want to use a fully opaque embossing powder this time around. In this case, I am using the Ranger embossing powder blue tinsel. What's nice about this one is it's pretty much like glitter, but in embossing powder, which the nice thing about that is I like glitter. I hate the mess that it makes and that it never really stays properly on a card. The nice thing about the embossing powder is it actually does stay on the card well. So you kind of get all the positives of being able to use glitter and the negatives like the mess and it constantly falling off your card. So now I'm going to heat set. So there you can see that on the black cardstock, between the silver and gold paint and then the Fun Sparkle embossing powder, you end up getting quite a vivid image on this card. And again, you can see how this overlaps. Well, this, you can still see the embossing, the color underneath the embossing powder. So again, 2 completely different looks, depending on what you would like to see in your image. So now the next thing to do is add the sentiment for these cards. So I'm going to be using sentiments from this Christmas time Stampers Anonymous collection. I'm actually going to use the A Merry Christmas and the Season's Greetings. So using this 1 inch by 4 1/4 inch piece of cardstock, I am going to stamp my sentiment. So I'm using the A Merry Christmas. I'm using a Stays On ink pad. A Stays On ink pad will stamp on any surface, which is why I use it for these sorts of projects. So there you go. There's your sentiment. And I'm just going to let this one just sit for a minute before I attach to the card. The next thing I'm going to do is use my 5 inch by 2 inch piece of cardstock to color the background so it will work with the card a bit better. So because I actually use Broken China in this card, I'm also going to be using my Broken China Distress ink pad to color the background. This is the nice thing about the Distress ink, because they do have their ink colors also in their embossing colors, and there's a lot of overlap basically in the colors that they use for a bunch of their products. The nice thing about it is you can get it in the ink, you can get it in the embossing powder, and this way you have a lot of consistency when you want to create cards like this. And if you don't know how to ink blend, I do have a video about how to ink blend on different types of surfaces, which I will also include in the links below. As well, if you're also not that familiar with embossing, I also do have a video about how to emboss. which I will also include below. So you can decide how dark or light you want it. I don't really feel the need to get everything perfectly consistent, but it really is up to you on how deep of a color you want in this background for your stamped image. And in this case, I am going to be using my archival ink for this. It's a little bit juicier than my StazOn ink, and because I don't have to worry about it being on a slippery surface, because this is not a slippery surface, this seems to be a better choice. There you go. Now, before I cut this out, the next thing I'm going to do is actually, in the illuminated letters, I'm going to add a little bit of gold jelly roll pen. Oh, and I hope you will consider making simple cards like this for the holidays. You might be wondering why I do a lot of cards, because I am generally an art journaler and a mixed media artist. So why the cards? For me, I really enjoy giving them to people. I really enjoy the process of coming up with some simple designs that are easily replicated so that I can do multiples of a particular card in a very short period of time. And that allows me to be able to give them to people. I really enjoy making cards because it's a way of being able to show that artistic self-expression, to be able to share something that you've made with somebody and really brighten their day. And so for me, it's always a simple way of just blessing others. And I feel that, especially during this time of pandemic, there's so much going on, and we have to social distance and we cannot spend time together. And I look at it and go, being able to send someone a handmade card might be one of those things that just shows that you really care and you want to be with these people, but you just may not be able to due to the pandemic. So I have to say that for me, I'm going to be doing more handmade cards this year than ever before. So yeah, basically jelly pen, I'm just trying to not take away that design in the center and just basically just kind of draw around it where you can. So the next thing you want to do is cut this out. Instead of just fussy cutting this out, I wanted to show you one that I have actually done before. So what I did is I eyeballed it. I basically cut across and then just around, but not all the way to the edge because I like having a little bit of the blue space around it. But I thought it was a little bit more interesting than just the flat, solid block of text. And when you look at this card, if you can put the solid block of text, that's actually a very strong look. But I think what I was hoping for was something a little bit more subtle. So by cutting this out like this, it doesn't take away as much from the background. And again, you can maybe put higher or lower on the card. I usually try to fit it around the third line. Because again, if you think about the rule of thirds, which I've talked about in other videos, if you divide your card in three this way and you divide your card in three that way, those are kind of the sweet spots for your design. So in this case, by putting it here, I feel like it makes for a more interesting card than just the big block of text. If you're not comfortable fussy cutting, just do the big block of text. But I really like the idea of having it come across. So I basically just eyeballed where the line was. You could probably sit there with a ruler and a pencil and find your lines perfectly, but I generally don't care to put quite that much effort into these. They're meant to be quick cards. They're meant to be something that I can produce quite a few of them in a very short period of time. So I'm just quickly going to adhere these and we'll continue on. So as you can see here, we have our two finished cards. Again, very different look when you're going with black and with white paper. And again, by using different varieties of embossing powder, you can add a lot of variety to these cards. And using different sediments, you can get very different looks. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, if you could like it, subscribe to my channel, and maybe provide a comment below about what you liked about this video. As well, I have my website, hopalongstudio.com, where I have other ideas on how you can have creative habits in your personal life. I hope you have a really great week, and I will see you next time.